guess I was with Tiny about 2 years on two different occasions. We spent a lot of time together. We toured from Florida to California. And first time out, I had a singing partner, Cherie, the Harve and Cherie show. You may remember them. She doesn't even remember. But and Tiny was very generous and very supportive. He had us open the show for him, and then I doubled as his piano player and sometimes guitar player. And he was great, very funny, and much different than the public persona. Tiny was distinctly two people, but his personality when talking to me and dealing with me, I was much younger than him, and he would treat me like the younger brother he never had and give me show business advice. And you know, while he would talk on TV like, "Oh, Mr. Carson," to me it was in a deep baritone voice, and it was like, "Mr. Man, in this business you've got to be a hustler." I don't know where one personality began and ended. I think the one with me was the real him, but I think he had done the the persona for so long that kind of, the two of them kind of meshed in certain places. Initially, Tiny was a legitimate singer in the Bing Crosby tradition, and he has a amazing memory of early 1900s, the music of that time, even a little earlier, like the 1890s, and he'll tell you the first records, what the labels were, and who the performers were, and some great lost material that he really was the one resource for. And Tiny was obsessed with women, in spite of the image. Tiny, he was very much into the opposite sex, young, pretty girls. In fact, every year he would give a trophy to the girl he met that year who he thought was the trophy winner. But anyway, we were at this club, I don't remember exactly where it was, but suddenly the show was about to end. Tiny would do Tiptoe Through the Tulips as his big closer, and then maybe an encore or two. And suddenly there was this really attractive girl that was showing him a lot of attention. Somehow she ended up on stage, and all of a sudden Tiny gets his ukulele and he starts singing all these songs I'd never heard him do before. It was like all his Greenwich Village material, and I guess things that he was a big hit for when he first got started. He was going non-stop, and it was obvious that he was strutting his stuff. It was his A game to go over on this sexy girl that was there. So I was kind of at a loss. I didn't want to jump in on this, but then he went into this Tom Lehrer song. Well, I'm a big Tom Lehrer fan, and I knew it like the back of my hand, so I just started playing along with it. Tiny, this is the only time he ever flipped out at me. He turns to me and goes, "Don't you dare play on this." He didn't, I don't know, it all had to do with this girl. I saw him a few minutes after the show. Sadly, I didn't see the girl there, but he was very nice, and I kind of said something. He was, it was like it never happened. Anyway, there was this one time that we were in New York, and I got this girl on the show. Probably, if I'm honest, because I wanted to try to get with her. We were going somewhere outside of New York where we were staying in a motel, and her last name was Vic, and I got her in the show to play the cello, I think it was, and maybe do a little dancing. And Tiny liked the idea that we were going to call her Miss Vic, like Miss Vicky. So anyway, she came, and as things would happen, there was no extra room for Miss Vic, so it was, she was supposed to stay in my room. That's how it was worked out. Now Tiny went crazy over this because he felt he was contributing to sin. The fact that he was putting me and this girl, which is the way I was hoping it would go, in this great line of temptation. So I always, if Tiny would talk to me and tell me showbiz stories, I was always there for that. I spent hours on the road listening to his stories and asking him questions. He was fascinating about this. So he called me into his room after the show to tell me something. I went. And it was only after he had me there for like a good length of time that I realized he was keeping me there to prevent me from being with that girl, that hopefully by the time he finished telling me all his stories, she would be asleep, which sadly that's how it turned out. But anyway, the thing that's on the other side of this whole situation is that the story Tiny told me was that he was worried about his career. And he said to me, "Mr. Mann, if things fall any lower, I may have to make this porno movie I've written." And I said, "What? Porno movie that Tiny's written?" Now, I gotta say this. I knew Tiny quite a while at this point. I had never known Tiny to write a song. You know, as it turns out, I've read somewhere in a book where he had written some, but it wasn't his thing. He was not a songwriter. And, you know, he didn't tell anybody he was. But all of a sudden, he's telling me he wrote this porno movie called Deep Tongue. And he wrote the songs for it. He sat there and sang me these songs from Deep Tongue. And they were very well written. I mean, they were like, you know, the lyrics were like almost Zappa-esque. You know? I mean, I remember it was, I know he must have known it was funny. I mean, he was singing it like in almost his version of a serious opera voice. Deep Tongue! You know, and it was, but the songs were very well crafted. I mean, he was a real, it showed a real gift for writing, you know, satirical songs. And after that night, it was never mentioned again. I never heard a single thing about Deep Tongue. Very strong convictions about Christianity and how he interpreted Christianity. He believed that, you know, any form of sex outside of marriage was sinful. Yet he said to me, at least on one occasion, or more than one occasion, you know, sometimes the devil wins. I got very lucky when I moved to New York. Within a month, I got this terrific job singing and playing at this place on the east side called the Gaslight Club. And along with that, I would also, part of the job was they had these kind of dancing chorus type girls in real skimpy outfits. The women's livers would have hated this. Yeah, that they would wait on the tables and they would get up and sing also. So I would back them up as well as do my own thing. Anyway, it was a great job, and when I first got it, I was so excited. I went and told Tiny. Tiny was living at the Olcott Hotel, and he looked at me real serious, and in his New York streetwise voice, he said to me, "That place is run by the big boys." You know, I thought, great. So anyway, about a month went by, and there was this one guy that took a liking to me, and he said, "Hey, Harve, if there's any Broadway show you want to go to, just let me know you got tickets." So I immediately thought of, you know, I love Mickey Rooney, so I said, "Sugar Babies." So how many tickets? I said, 3. So anyway, I had these 3 tickets for an afternoon performance of Sugar Babies, which was the hot show in New York, and I invited Tiny to go, and Tiny very rarely ventured out of his house. I figured we had like one more. I let Tiny even pick the girl. He liked one of the girls at the Gaslight Club. I forget her name, but she was pretty and had a really nice voice. And he invited her as kind of his date, but, you know, I was there. So anyway, we get to the place. Tiny is like, he's a little bit paranoid being out in public, so he had like a hood on. And he's walking around like, you know, incognito. As much as a guy walking around like this with a hood on can be. Although New York, anything can pass for normal. But anyway, you get to the front. I remember it was, stop it. I remember it was raining, and we got to the front of the thing, and I went up and I did the appropriate thing, mentioned the name, and I looked over. Tiny and the girl were standing on the side, and suddenly the lady behind the cashier's counter said, "There's no record of you having tickets." And I went into a panic mode, and I thought, boy, I get Tiny out of the house, which is very rare, with the hood and everything, and here I'm not going to deliver. So I just, as a last shot, I mentioned the guy's name. I remembered his name, and then she went back, and then within 10 seconds, we're being ushered into the front row of the front part of the theater, right in the center, and the show was great. And this was interesting, though. Tiny, I guess if I'm totally honest, I wanted Tiny's company anyway, but I also thought maybe through Tiny's celebrity I might get to meet Mickey Rooney. But Tiny was interesting. He did not want to go backstage and, uncalled for. In other words, he felt that looked like he was, being Mr. Agenda Man or something. And so he would have been thrilled if Mickey Rooney had asked him, but who knows, Mickey Rooney probably didn't know he was there. But anyway, this is a sad story. I'm going back to the beginning when the first day we're going to the show, that day. I called Tiny up just to confirm our plans, and I have no idea, Mickey Rooney's speaking voice, what it sounds like, but just as a joke that I never thought would pass as a real thing, I called as Mickey Rooney, and I said, "Hey Tiny, this is Mickey Rooney." And Tiny bought it, which I never expected. And he got so excited, and he went right into the high voice. He went, "Oh, Mr. Rooney, I'm so excited!" And I felt so awful having to tell him it was me. After a certain amount of time, I decided I was going to just move to New York cold and see what would happen. And as fate would have it, Tiny, who I hadn't seen for probably a year and a half or so, was in New York at this time, and I was able to hook up with him again. And I remember the first night I went to see him, he was now at a point in his career where he was attracting, the New York huckster type. At this point, he had these two guys, Mr. Clemente and Mr. I think it was Zanima, that were, pumping him up. And I met them in a recording studio, and they were just piling on I don't know what the word is, but say, "Tiny, we finish this recording, I'm taking it right up to Johnny Carson, you're going to be back on top." And the other guy, Mr. Zazima, said, "Yeah, Tiny, my buddy Ed Sullivan, he's going to hear this, and you're going to be right on the charts again and in the top of the game." So, and Tiny, seemed very great. Was like, "Oh, Mr. Clemente, you're so wonderful. Mr. Zedima, I don't know what I could do without you." So anyway, during the course of this evening, these two gentlemen heard a little bit of my stuff, and they were talking about wanting to sign me, and I thought, wow, this is great. I just came to New York. And so anyway, after the session, I went back to Tiny. He was living at the Alcott Hotel, and went back to his room, and I said, "Hey, Tiny, Mr. Clemente and Mr. Zedima, they want to sign me. What do you think?" Tiny suddenly looks at me, now with the deep voice, he says, "Let me put it to you this way, Mr. Man. If Mr. Clemente and Mr. Zedima both discovered gold in California, it'd be a question of which one pulled the gun first." I always thought that story pretty much exemplified, at least the Tiny that I saw. That was, to me, was the real Tiny. And he had he was half Jewish, and he had kind of that Jewish self-deprecating wit about himself, and at this point in how his career had kind of plummeted. And he was very funny in a way that I never saw him do on television or even on radio when he did Howard Stern later on. He always seemed to play some version of the "Oh, Mr. Carson" guy. When he would deal with me, it was this whole different thing. It was like a very wise, streetwise New Yorker with a very funny, self-deprecating wit. And, I'm sorry that the public at large never got to see that part of his personality.